It's spring. But most of all, it's Robert Zee's Grand VC Lottery. Stay tuned for my entry right after this. Hello vinyl community, how are you doing? It's Bernard at It's a Ride. Thanks so much for being here with me today. This video is a very special one. It's my entry for Robert Zee's Vinyl Community Lottery 2022 edition. And this year, Mr. Z, whom I salute by the way, is particularly curious. He wants to know everything about us as a collector. So this video is going to be loaded with information, some personal history, my passion for vinyl records and CDs, how I define myself in relation to the concept of collecting music, and many other topics like storage, what I'm focusing on when I buy music, what I use to clean my records, my setup, and much more. It's a substantial agenda, so let's dive in right away. For as long as I can remember, I've always been fascinated by music and melodies. My parents had a big brown rectangular furniture with speakers on each side and a turntable inside. My mom would sing along the songs and she would rock me in her rocking chair. In '83, I was 7 years old. The Michael Jackson phenomenon entered my life. We could not escape it. My sister, I think, made my parents buy the record. In June of '85, I turned 9 years old. That exact item was what I asked for my birthday, the Jacksons' Victory. Around that time, I also discovered with amazement that I could record songs from the radio on a cassette tape, so I was having lots of fun doing that. The pop hits of the mid-'80s. Also in '85, my dad bought a VHS recorder. My brother and I, we started recording music videos. The very first video that we ever recorded was Strange Animal by Gowan. Then in '86, when I was 10 years old, we ordered cassettes through the Columbia House Music Club. I remember that was some of the most exciting things to wait for. It seemed to me that the package took forever to arrive, and when it did, it was better than Christmas. We had ordered pop music like Thompson Twins, Madonna, The Box, Corey Hart, and my favorites at the time, Duran Duran. That first Columbia House subscription was instrumental for me. Around that time and until '87, '88 or so, there were a few key albums that were pivotal to me. They contributed to develop my preference for more guitar-driven music and a slightly harder melodic rock sound. Slippery When Wet, The Final Countdown, Hysteria, and Eye of the Tiger by Survivor. Seeing that I loved the title track so much, an older cousin of mine gave me his copy. I still own it today. But there was also another one that intrigued me even more because it was the most mysterious. There were no music videos. I had no idea how the band members looked like, and as I understood it, they were creating spaceship sounds with their guitars. It was all I needed to know, of course, Third Stage by Boston. And then another cousin introduced me to some of what we refer to as hair metal. So that was reflected in my next Columbia House subscription around '89 and '90. I kept many cassettes from that period. Then in '92, at the age of 16, I bought my first mini stereo equipped with a CD player. Discovering CDs was fabulous and I still love them to this day. In the years that followed, I was able to buy a few here and there. When I was shopping physically, it was at places like HMV, Sam the Record Man, Archambault. There was also a CD store close to my house. At 16 or 17, I gave them my CV, but it did not work out. I was slowly starting to discover classic rock music as well, mainly through Sean's rock station in Montreal. In '93, I attended my first concert. Bon Jovi. It was amazing, except for a week I thought I would lose my hearing. Most of my friends were listening to edgier, more modern stuff, Nirvana and company, but I seemed to prefer the more melodic and sweet to the ear music. 94 was another huge year for me. It was the year when Boston released their long-awaited new album. That's a whole story in itself. And that was also when I discovered Yes through the Yes Story 2 CD compilation. From 95 to 98, I did not spend too much money on music because I was devoting my time and money to university. And then when I started working in the fall of 98, that's when I bought my first classical music CDs, and that opened up a whole new world. Slowly, I could afford to spend more. In the 2000s, I never stopped buying CDs here and there, but I also started burning CDs. And later, yes, downloading quite massively as well. In 2003, I went to a Boston concert in Toronto with my new wife, who is still my wife today, and it was a highlight of my life. I then delved into the AOR and melodic rock scene, mainly through the awesome website melodicrock.com. And slowly I discovered eBay and Amazon to acquire the stuff that was not available locally. Fast forward to 2012, that was when I realized that with the Turntable there were great opportunities in Montreal to buy low-priced records that would otherwise cost a lot or be hard to find on CD. One example is Patti Smythe, Never Enough. I was getting a bit tired of downloading music and found that new project very exciting. That was around that time that I started watching vinyl community videos. I came back from my first visit to Haut-33 with a dozen of albums. It was a refreshing experience. It's always a thrill to receive new music packaged by mail. However, nothing beats browsing records at the store for me. Lock me in a good record store for a whole day and I'm a happy man. Typically, when I go shopping for music, I spend several hours flipping through almost all records. I pay attention to new arrivals. I like checking out which Japanese pressings they got. I like to spot gold stamp promos, that kind of details. All things I was not aware of before knowing you guys over here in the VC. And to start my collection at the time, I also bought a huge lot of 330 records from an individual seller. I only paid $400. Those kinds of deals are close to impossible to find nowadays. Perhaps the best item in that collection is that Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, a limited clear vinyl edition from 1990. So that's how I dove again in the vinyl world. I did not really have a collector's mindset, and to this day, sure, I like many aspects of collecting in the true sense of the term, but what I'm truly looking for is connecting with my music and honoring the albums within the limits of reason. My wife and friends would say I'm definitely a collector. I say I like my music to surround me. It's sure fun to own the occasional collector item, but I'm not always on the hunt for more of that type of stuff. I'm into CDs just as much as I'm into vinyl records. The decision to buy an album on CD or on vinyl, or both sometimes, is based on instinct and circumstances for me. I see my CD and record collection a little bit like a sculpture that I'm slowly creating. If I had this or that album in my vinyl collection or in my CD collection, would it make sense to that collection, if you see what I mean? Also, this may come a bit as a surprise for some of you, but besides my official physical releases that I have, I maintain a ton of albums on digital files or cloned CDRs. That part of my music far exceeds the total of my CDs and vinyl records. So my physical items only reflect a fraction of my musical universe. I'm pretty organized in the way I store all those files in separate folders in hard drives. On top of that, I use Spotify for discoveries. For example, each time I watch a video by our VC friend Jacob from Denmark, Spotify is useful to try some of his recommendations. I see my vinyl record collection as getting to an end in the not-so-distant future in terms of size. I feel I'm getting pretty close to my comfort zone in terms of how many vinyl records I want to maintain in total in my collection. So in terms of titles, I feel my sculpture is starting to look pretty much like its final state. There will always be a place for upgrades and some tweaking after that. I usually don't refrain from buying an album that is not perfectly near mint if I really feel like buying it. Especially when I come across an AOR record that I'm really not sure I'm going to stumble on again in the future. And that brings me to the topic of condition. I do have condition as an important criteria. When one of my albums has a seam split or a bit of a ring wear, for example, it bothers me a bit. It's an irritant. Robert feels strongly that condition is everything. Fair enough. I, for one, would be tempted to declare that, for me, connection is everything. I'm talking about emotional connection. Take this Harem Scarum CD. Nothing to write your mom about technically. However, I feel a strong connection to it. It reminds me of the time I went to Ottawa with a great friend to go to the band's show in support of that album. I'm keeping my ticket inside. So that's one example. Most of the time the story is not that special, but I feel every item holds a certain memory. For instance, it can simply be a reminder of a nice visit at the record store. So what am I focusing on for my music collection? In a large part, I concentrate my purchases in very specific categories. My main focus for my purchases is my 20 favorite bands, whether it is vinyl or CDs. I'm now storing my vinyl for those bands in separate sections. In this crate, I have my Boston, my Yes, and my Toto. These are my 3 favorite bands of all time right there. Continuing here in that other crate, with my Rush, my Tom Petty, and my Survivor. My 3 other favorite bands or artists in order of preference. Then on top of this furniture here, I display my beloved Queen box set. And right below, which is right in front of me when I listen to music, I store my records for all the other bands that make up my 20 favorites. In alphabetical order, Blue Rodeo, my Dire Straits starting with the Mo-Fi's, and then Fleetwood Mac, but only starting from 1975. Continuing here with Harem Scarum, Heart, Helix, Journey, Kansas, Night Ranger, and then there's one single Queen record, A Gift from Phil. Then the biggest section here is my Saga, followed by Styx, Triumph, and finally The Who. And there's one more section of records that is part of my favorite section. It's for my favorite composer, Beethoven. And to the far right, I have some jazz and classical music records. In my main unit here, in alphabetical order of artist or band name, I store everything else. Well, not everything, because I also have some records upstairs in the living room. In a nutshell, if you browse my shelves here, you would see that my tastes are mainly AOR and classic rock. I also love my 80s pop music. You would also see that I have a strong interest for Canadian rock bands of the 70s and 80s, like Streetheart and Loverboy, to name only 2. So it's A to Z, up to here, with a small soundtrack, Christmas and various artists section at the end. My younger daughter owns the bottom part, as you can see. And that leads me to my CDs. For practical reasons, I have regrouped some of my favorite bands with large discographies in this tower. Triumph, REO Speedwagon, Styx, Survivor, Helix, Foreigner, Toto, Kansas, Yes, Dire Straits, Led Zeppelin, Journey, Rush, Scorpions. And right beside my setup, I have a box with my Boston and Boston-related stuff. Here I have another separate section with my Blue Rodeo and Mark Knopfler. And behind that box, I have mainly classical music CDs. In this other tower, I have more classical music, plus some Christmas and jazz stuff. In the corner here, some DVDs and books. Here on this piece of furniture, I have a few box sets. The Decca Sound, the Miles Davis collection, a set of Beethoven's piano sonatas, Michel Pagliaro and April Wine. But my current focus for my collection is the Italian rock label Frontiers. I recently built a shelf unit dedicated to Frontiers, and I'm trying to collect the titles that I like the best from the label. It's hard to keep up because they release tons of great stuff on a regular basis. In this particular unit, I decided to organize my CDs in order of catalog number. My Frontiers box sets are also here, like my Harem Scarum box. I bagged that one, getting the inspiration from Robert. Next time I will use transparent tape instead, like he does. I like spending time sorting all the Frontiers releases in a document and identifying those that are higher priority and stuff like that. So the Frontiers label really is an area where I try to concentrate my effort these days. I can find most of the newest Frontiers releases at a music and bookstore called Archambault close to my place. I also buy them from Amazon or directly from Frontiers. When it comes to older titles, say from more than 5 or 6 years ago, I have to use eBay or Discogs. I only have a few Frontiers titles on vinyl. I store them separately. They look glossy and fantastic, but I'm not super impressed with the quality of the pressing. So I essentially stick to CDs when it comes to Frontiers. One of the things I like to do a lot is maintaining album lists. I entered all my CDs and vinyl records on Discogs. Also, back in 2000, I created an Access database, and 22 years later I still use the same file. I used to log every copied album as well, whether it was MP3 or audio CDR, but I excluded them all at one point as my collection grew larger and I veered a bit more toward the collector mindset. So when I get an album, one of the first steps for me is to enter the item both in Discogs and in my Access database. I never have unlistened albums in my physical collection for very long. I avoid buying so many that I cannot keep up. Like I said, we have a family setup upstairs, but most of the time I listen to my music on my main system downstairs in my music corner. Personally, a rocking chair is a must. For me, it just would not be a complete listening room with a fixed, non-moving chair. So it's arguably the most important element of my setup. My amp is a Rega Brio R. I used to have the corresponding Rega Apollo CD player, but the driver failed recently and I replaced it with this Marantz Super Audio CD player. I only have 2 CDs using the Super Audio technology. They are hybrids, so they work on normal CD players as well. So I was not specifically looking for a Super Audio CD player, but it was a very good deal and the machine looked strong and reliable to me. It also has a USB port to play digital files from a USB key. Here, this is my musical headphone amp that I use often with my Grado headphones. It's really handy when I don't want to bother anyone in the family. My turntable is a Rega RP1. I upgraded it with a blue orthophone cartridge and a glass plate. My speakers are bookshelf B&W speakers. And finally, this is my subwoofer, which I rarely use. And this is my very simple turntable setup upstairs. We use it to listen to records as a family. Now, how do I protect my items? Well, for my records, 99% of the time, I use an outer sleeve like this. I also use the resealable Japanese kind with a flap for certain records. I usually buy those sleeves from my favorite record store, Au 33 Tours. After cleaning the record with my spin clean, I usually insert it in a new inner sleeve like that one, and I leave it outside just like this. For my CDs, I use outer bags like these, mainly for the ones that are made from cardboard stock, or for the ones that are more rare or precious. However, I use them systematically for my Frontiers CDs. I found those sleeves at the dollar store and they do the job. About my 45s or 7-inch records, I think I have less than 50 of them. I don't collect them except for Boston. I only have 3 Boston 45s so far anyway. I keep those in the same crate as my Boston LPs, but for all the other 45s that I have, what I do is I insert them with the album that's the most fitting. Like for example, I put this Icehouse 45 of the song Electric Blue in the corresponding Icehouse record. This has worked for me so far since I have so few 45s. Robert also mentioned audiophile pressings. When it comes to audiophile pressings, I don't need too many to be happy. However, I do enjoy owning those that I have, and once in a while I'm more than willing to spend more to acquire them, especially when it's a title by one of my favorite bands. For example, I acquired all the Dire Straits that came out on MoFi in the last couple of years. Another example is that Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony on Analog Productions. I cherish those types of items, and it's always very special when I welcome a new one in the collection. I have to admit, I think a lot about all that, and sometimes I say to myself, what if I start only buying very high-end or collectible items and stop looking at all the rest? But then I'm not so sure I would necessarily be more happy. I think the bottom line is I like the balance that I have established. About Record Store Day, I've always felt it was a little bit too crazy for me. I enjoyed the celebration and seeing people getting excited about it, but I'm not really taking part in it. Most of the time when I look at the list, I don't see albums that I really need. I do have a handful of Record Store Day items though, and they're cool to own. One of the other questions that you asked is whether or not we consider ourselves as completists. I do feel that way a little bit. When it comes to an artist or band that I really like, I often feel the need to get at least all of their studio albums. And I often like to have them both on the CD and vinyl formats for some reason. I'm pretty loyal to the bands I love, and I usually continue following them long after their heydays. Yes, Kansas, Toto, for example. But I have to draw the line somewhere. I don't really go for the super deluxe reissue of an album, the singles, all the live albums, all the solo stuff, etc. Usually I get a sense of completeness with a band when I have all or most of their studio recordings. So we've reached the end of this overview of how I see myself as a collector. There were a lot of topics to cover and I hope you liked it. Best of luck to everyone who participates in this. As a volunteer in this, I will be honored to send an album to the winner as part of the big prize. My letter is Z, which is very cool. Thank you so much for your great support, everyone, and special thanks to Robert for organizing this. I love reading comments below and interacting with you, so please don't hesitate. Take care, everybody, and enjoy the lottery.